Well, it's time for an album that honestly I didn't expect or plan to do a full length album review for, but this is a classic case of the more you put into it, the more you're rewarded. So let's dive into it. The Loser by Gospel. So, Gospel is, I guess, a post-hardcore band or a hardcore punk band. They formed back in 2003 from Brooklyn, New York, and put out their debut album, The Moon is a Dead World. Really got kind of a notoriety within like the mid-2000s with other contemporary post-punk, hardcore punk bands like the Mars Volta and At the Drive-In by blending a lot more of progressive rock and hardcore music within their presentation of styles. They were kind of a one and done, like after 2005, they hadn't really been heard of since. And there's always been whispers of, will they, won't they come back for another one? Now we have The Loser. And a lot of people were recommending it to me because of the progressive rock flavor of the music that was found on here. And upon the first listen, I will fully admit, wasn't a big fan. Like I do find with this type of hardcore music, man, I got to be in the right frame of mind, because if I'm not, I am just going to not be engaged at all. But if I'm in that right frame of mind, I love this expression of music. Like this is the style of music that I love with like Swans or Daughters or anything that just is very extreme in the presentation. And I'm not talking about like the 90s of like, they're cycled to the extreme. I'm talking like pushing the boundaries of what actually is music. And these guys definitely flaunt a little bit with that. They're very aggressive. If you're not into the screaming or the yelling or the abrasive singing styles, maybe tap out with this one. Maybe it's not necessarily for you. And I will admit, upon the first, as I mentioned, first couple of listens of this album, I can kind of take it or leave it. But on the first listen, it was with the fourth track of SRO that really got me excited and really like started to see the progressive and the prog side of things on this album, and I was just blown away. And after that, with White Spaces and the use of synthesized piano and keyboards, like there was an electric piano on this album that I was not expecting at all. I think that's what really elevated it for me, was the use of all these different sounds and not relying on strictly the guitars to be the big focal point. So many of the big sounds and big soundscapes are provided by the synths, the keyboards. But with that, there's still that huge, meaty, just balls to the wall insanity of music. Like the track begins with Bravo that just opens up with a punch. It's relentless. It's driven. Like the drumming on here is just balls to the wall, like intense the whole time. But unlike other bands that kind of have this like very aggressive, very abrasive, there's a lot of fluctuality within this. And even within Bravo, like we come into about the 2-minute mark, and we're playing around with different soundscapes and different sounds on the keyboards that really recontextualize the music that came before. Sure, we're still in this very abrasive, very energetic, very fast-paced, in-your-face style of music, but when it's recontextualized within this style of playing, man, it provides such a very unique playing styles within it. And then we come into Dear Ghost, and that energy is still pumping. It's still very tangible. Again, it's reminding me a lot of the Mars Volta within like Goliath Within Bedlam, just being relentless, always on, always focused. The playing style is tight. Once we get into that keyboard, and again, that electric piano within it, it provides so much grip and so much power that I was surprised at how much I was honestly enjoying this level of raw power music that normally I'm not a big fan of. Like it was reminding me of a lot of the moments from like Mastodon with their Leviathan album, very like meaty, very tough, very hard, but they're not relying on a lot of those very dark, very heavy, very deep guitar sounds to kind of lean on as a crutch that a lot of these metal acts are doing nowadays. They are allowing the guitars to, sure, play a little bit of the foundation work on here, but at no point do the guitars ever really deep dive into that like very genty style that I feel so many prog metal outfits are putting out today. Then we come into the third track of Hyper, and I swear it feels like some of the best parts from Ghost in terms of utilizing the synths and utilizing sounds to create something really brilliant and very big. And at this point, like, the singer isn't just screaming his balls off the whole time. Like, his providing of sounds and singing on this one isn't screaming, it isn't yelling, it's not doing that. Like, it's clean, it's clear, but it still has that note of raw energy, that raw power behind it. And that's so interesting of how he's able to command that. And I still love the chance that they have for a little bit of a play out on this. You know, they have a little bit of a jam session, and I really appreciate that. I'm saying I really appreciate that a lot. At this point, and I know I'm going to get into it at SRO, that I was kind of hoping for a little bit more crescendo work, you know, and that was one of the reasons why I really like this post-hardcore punk, was some of their more crescendo-y moments, their big build-ups, those big payoffs. But man, we get into SRO and we get those in spades. Love SRO. I love the big build-ups. I love the big payoffs. I think it's so punchy. It's so poignant. Utilizes so much of what I love about progressive rock and prog music and infuses it in this hardcore setting that really makes like bands like Mastodon or Opeth or some of those more aggressive extreme metal bands just pale in comparison at points. We come into the fifth track of Tango. Love how this track never sits still. You know, like, it goes from punch to a little bit more mellow. You know, it's still got that drive, that's still got that energy, but it's not as aggressive. It's not as intense, but it still has that energy behind it. And I love how it goes from one point to another without really losing the through line. So then we come into White Spaces. Not a big fan of this track. It is a little bit on the shorter side at 3 minutes and 17 seconds. And I don't know, like, it didn't quite come together quite as much for me as a lot of the past tracks did, like especially with Dear Ghost being a little bit more short, a little bit more punchy, a little bit more contained. Still enjoyed like the raw energy that was felt within it, but I didn't have the time to really dive into it because by the time I get into this track, it's already gone. Now, that can't be said about my second favorite track. If SRO is my favorite track, Metallic Olives is definitely my second favorite track. This is where we get that really powerful electric piano. This is where we get that really powerful like jam session that I love. And it's able to take this very raw, very powerful, very extreme metal, but like bring it down into a little bit more of a soothing, somber, ethereal landscape. And I love that driving force of the beat that we have on here that really punches this track through, and then it elevates it back up into just this atmosphere and elevation of styles that, man, really brings this track together. And I love the drive of this track, man. I love how it's just that rooted within the guitars and the bass of that dun 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 dun, so rhythmic. It's almost chanting like a war drum in that sense. And you've got these very high pitched, very heavenly styles within the electric piano work that provides just a perfect contrast to that. And finally, the album ends off with Warm Bed. And I love how this album finishes off on a little bit more of a somber note, like definitely still has a little bit punch, a little bit of gas left in the tank that provides such a great turnaround style. I think it ends the album off very, very beautifully, very, very hauntingly, and it doesn't feel the need to like blow down the doors at every instance. There's a lot of variations within the styles here to allow a little bit of a breather of fresh air at times. Like, there's a lot of intense stuff going on here that I appreciate that Warm Beds has a little bit more variety to allow me just to kind of digest, breathe a little bit, and allow the album to end with a pretty substantial and pretty satisfying bang. I think Gospel came back from their very lengthy hiatus with just an absolute banger of an album. So it's really for that reason that I have to say The Loser by Gospel is one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. Like, I was surprised at how much I found myself loving and enjoying this album after my initial listen. Because my initial listen, I was like, wow, this is a little bit much, a little bit too intense for me. But the more I got into it, the more I found myself loving. And honestly, that is a sign of a brilliant album. When my initial response was, I don't know. But my lasting impression is much more satisfied, much more, I can really dig this. I really like this album. So yeah, this is a recommendation for me if you're into this kind of music. It gets the note seal of approval. This is definitely a run, don't walk to go and listen to it. The hype is real for this one. You know, it's one of those all aboard the hype train. So yeah, go and check it out. And that's what I've got for The Loser from Gospel. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's all I've got for you guys today. That's all I've got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.